R300B tube amplifiers. Let's talk about it. I think the last time I wore a medical glove was like when I dissected a sheep brain in university. Anyways, very uncomfortable. I hate those. The reason I wore them is because apparently skin oil, human oil is harmful to tubes. So I usually use a glove or a piece of napkin or something like that. Anyways, today we're talking about the Willsenton R300. It's an affordable 300B integrated amplifier. And if you remember, Willsenton makes some really good, affordable integrated tube amplifiers. For example, if you remember, I reviewed the Willsenton R8 about 2-3 years ago, and that was a pretty affordable integrated amplifier, but it was using KT88 or EL34 tubes. In this case, the Willsenton R300 is now using 300B tubes. The price point is similar to the R8, coming in just under $1,000 on China Hi-Fi's website or about $1,500 on Amazon, including shipping. So with shipping and all that included, you're looking around $1,500 US. And in the world of tube amplifiers, that is pretty affordable. Overall, the build quality is quite excellent, just as it was on the Willsenton R8. The R300 has this beautiful lacquer finish. And even the cage is extremely well done. Now, I don't use the cage because I like to show off the tubes, but if you have children or pets, then definitely you do want to put the cage on. And definitely it is a beautiful design and something that you really wouldn't expect for this kind of price range. In fact, I guarantee that when you get it in your hands, you're going to be like, whoa, that's some nice finish for this price range. The build quality is extremely good. And even in the inside, it's pretty reasonable. Yes, it's not using some Jupiter caps or some exotic cap material, but relatively speaking, in this price range, this is a pretty acceptable, if not even a very good choice in capacitors and components inside this thing. Now, I've said this again and again, but 300B tubes mostly, basically all the tube amplifiers I've heard to date with 300B designs, quite frankly, I haven't heard a terrible sounding 300B amplifier. And that's because it's a proven method. You know, tube amplifiers are not new technology. The schematics and all the technology has been out there for decades. So all it is better parts are available these days. And again, it's becoming more affordable, which is good for us. Now, the Willsenton R300, like I said, is using a 300B design. And it's also a single-ended amplifier, or SET for short. And that really just means that it's going to have less output naturally than a KT88 or 6550 push-pull designs like the Willsenton R8. So you're getting about 8 watts of Class A with the Willsenton R300. Now, that may not seem like a lot, but let me tell you that with pretty sensitive speakers, I'm talking about something around reasonably 88 dB and up and so on, even 87 dB sensitivity. So that's most speakers out there. Unless you have like the CAF LS50 or Magnapan speakers, then yes, you're not gonna drive to really loud volumes with the Willsenton R300. However, with most speakers out there nowadays having reasonable sensitivity, like Klipsch, like these arundels in the back there, those are 92 dB in sensitivity. So most speakers will be fine with the R300 in a small to medium sized room. It is only a concern when you go to large size rooms, then you may run out of power if you like to crank it up really loud. But even in large size rooms at reasonable volumes, these will do fine with a relatively sensitive speaker like the Arundel or Klipsch or Tecton and so on. So just remember that 8 watts is plenty in most cases, and certainly was for me in my room playing with the Willsenton R300. I never really ran out of juice. I think the only time I maybe ran out of juice in terms of like when I play really bass heavy music like Limit to Your Love by James Blake on speakers that are like CAF LS50s, then yes, the Willsenton R300 did struggle a little bit when it was recreating those really low frequencies. However, in most cases, I never ran out of juice, and even playing Limit to Your Love by James Blake on the Arundels with the R300, nope, not an issue. doesn't choke, doesn't clip, perfectly awesome. So as long as your speakers are sensitive enough, 8 watts, plenty of power. Now that begs to differ though. Why would you get the R300 for less power for similar money to the R8 that has heaps amounts more power? In fact, a lot of push-pull designs have way more power than single-ended designs like the 300B. So why in the hell would you do that? Well, to answer that question, let's look at some of the tube amplifiers I have here. I have the vintage Dynaco ST70, which are using EL3 4 tubes. And then I have this tube amplifier from Fluxion Audio, which is a brand that is made in Canada. And that one is using KT88 and probably a push-pull design. So look at those things, right? EL3 4 tubes have different sound. KT88 has different sound, 6550 has different sound, 300B has different sound. So you get where I'm going with here. There's a reason why these tube amplifiers are using different tubes because of the sound signature it provides. The 300B tubes are known to be sweet on the top end. It's known to be something that is unmatched in terms of sweetness on the top end. And that sweetness is not something that you can obtain easily with a KT88 or 6550 or EL3 4 tubes. I think the EL3 4 tubes designs are usually closest to 300B tubes, even in push-pull configuration in terms of the sweetness level. But honestly speaking, 300B is just way more natural and way more good at doing that sweetness thing on the top end. Now, what the hell do I mean by sweetness on the top end? Like, am I talking about chocolate? No, I'm not. I'm talking about sugar. No, jokes aside, when we talk about sweetness on the top end, us audiophiles, at least for me, when I talk about sweetness on the top frequency, we're talking about the refinement level, but also this sense of tingle in your ears. And it's something hard to explain unless you actually hear it for yourself, but I will try it anyways. So there are definitely different types of high frequency presentations I've come across over the years. So there are the types where it's snappy, it's quick, it's a little bit bright, maybe a little bit brittle for some people, but it's quick and snappy. That's not what sweetness is, but that's the type of sound I've heard with high frequency kind of detail. There's the latter, which is kind of like smooth, but almost too smooth. In ways you hear all the detail, but there's no excitement, there's no snap. But some people like that. So there's a balancing act there. And then there's the sweetness. The sweetness is something that, again, is kind of harder to explain because it's not bright, it's not rolled off or too smooth, but you hear all the little details almost like it's sparkling a little bit, but not in an aggressive way. And it makes you really appreciate and enjoy the high frequency. It has air, it has air around the instruments. So when it snaps or sparkles, it gives you a sensation of having the detail, but not in an aggressive fashion. And that's why us audiophiles associate with the sweetness, because it is sweet. It's almost like you can taste it in your mouth. I know that sounds crazy, but that comes with a good balancing act of being smooth, but at the same time, having those sparkles and having that brightness level just right. And that's what the 300B designs are naturally good at. And this type of sweetness is not something that solid-state amplifiers or push-pull designs are very good at. In fact, the designers have to put a lot of time and effort into these designs to make that sweetness if that's what they want to achieve. Whereas 300B designs, I found that it's fairly easy and natural for it to be good at that sweetness without too much work, meaning it's just inherently good at that sweetness. So the Willsenton R300, while it's an affordable tube integrated amplifier, definitely has that sweetness. Yes, it may not be as sweet or as refined on the top frequency as some of the more expensive options out there that cost your kidney, but it has that sweetness. And it's very enjoyable. It's very enjoyable with my Arendal speakers. It's very enjoyable with clip speakers that I've tried and Tecton speakers I've tried as well. And you know what? It is pretty good with even KEF LS50s. Yes, it's not gonna drive it to its fullest capability, but it does have that sweetness to it. However, the point I'm trying to make here is that the speakers also matter. For example, I found way more sweetness with the Arendals there than clips, and I found Tectons to be very sweet as well. Again, if your speakers have sweetness level already, right, it has that capability to be sweet, and you pair it up with a 300B design, it only shines further. Okay, enough about the sweetness. How's the mid-range and the bass? Well, the mid-range is pretty darn good. I mean, it is pretty neutral, has a little bit of warmth to it, is done right. It's holographic, it stretches far, definitely increases the soundstage on speakers that need it. For example, the around those there, the review is coming up, so I won't spoil it too much, but it needs a little bit of help with sound staging because it's a floor standard. And it definitely opens it up. So that mid-range has great tone, great nuance with a little bit of warmth to it. I wouldn't say it's as accurate as a Class D amplifier that measures perfectly, but that's not what you get tube amplifiers for. And it also has some texture. It has a little bit of grain to it, you know, kind of like my Dynaco ST70 vintage tube amplifier. And don't look down on it because the vintage amplifiers were quite good. Tube amplifiers from vintage era are quite good. And the Dynaco ST70, while it may not be perfect, has really good mid-range. And let me say, while it's a little bit grainy, meaning it's not as clear sounding as a solid-state device, it is much more enjoyable to my ears. It has this bloom I speak of, right? It sounds full-bodied. It sounds like you're enveloped in music. Instead of that lean sound you may get with some solid-state amplifiers that's technically amazing, but it's a little bit lean, you know? You can't listen to it for long periods of time, or it doesn't feel like you're enveloped in music or taking like a warm bath. This is relaxing sound. This is like a warm bath. You're sipping some wine. I don't know where I'm going with that. But anyways, you get the point. It's relaxing. And then there's the bass, and that's what makes this Willsenton R300 a killer deal and an affordable king in the 300B design world. Because usually, even in the high-end category of 300B tubes, the concentration is usually in the mid-range and high frequency because the bass is inherently lacking in a lot of these designs. And to kind of balance that act is something that is quite hard because 300B designs and most tube amplifiers around this price point, and even like I said in the higher end price categories, tends to not have the tightest bass, tends to be loose, and tends to be a little bit whoppy, meaning it's not fast, it's not engaging or smacking you in the face or body. It is a little bit lacking in that regard. And one of the reasons many people power their top half of the speaker, high frequency and mid-range, with tube amplifiers and then decide to run bass with Class D amplifiers, which I think is a totally valid way of doing it, but you're gonna have to spend a lot of money to get that. Whereas the R300, yes, it is not as quick, as tight as a solid-state device. However, it is not bad at all. In fact, when it comes to this price category of solid-state devices, it goes hand in hand. I mean, it's almost close. And yes, I could say the Willsenton R300 is a little bit less tight, a little bit less fast, but we're talking about smidge differences here when it comes to solid-state devices in comparison in this price category, even compared to something like the Denafrips Thalo. So the R300, in my opinion, is a more pleasant sounding, more attractive option than the R8. The R8 is still a viable choice. In fact, it has more power. There's no question about that. If you need the power, the R8 wins. The R8 has tighter bass. It has better slam. But the 300B's bass response, I find, is more pleasant. It is more smooth, more textured. The mid-range on the R300 is a little bit more grainy than the R8. The R8 is more cleaner sounding. However, again, it lends itself to that full bloom sound that the R8 has, but the 300B has more. And last but not the least, the R300's top frequency is something that can't be traded with other things. I mean, it's sweet, it's sparkly, and the R8, while it has that snappy high frequency and brightness and sparkle and air, it simply doesn't do the sweetness thing as well as the 300B design. Overall, in terms of sound staging, imaging capability, and overall the holographicness of the tube design is both similar in the R300 and the R8. So when deciding which one to go with, you would be really looking at two things. One, do you need the power of the R8? And also, which one is a better sound signature for your speakers that fits your preference? Overall, to make it very simple, I would say the 300B design is a more warmer and friendlier long listening session amplifier, while the R8 is more of a cooler, more neutral with a little bit of snappiness on the high frequency and tight bass. So pick your poison. But I've heard the R300 and the R8 and it's still a viable entry-level choice into the tube audio world. And in fact, a lot of people will agree with me on this. It's not disappointing at all, even compared to much more expensive high-end options. In fact, I've heard these integrated amplifiers side by side with a lot of more expensive tube integrated amplifiers and tube amplifiers. And let me tell you, they don't fall behind all that much, if at all. They hold their ground and they really shine what the tube is about. And most importantly, I feel like these integrated amplifiers are tuned extremely well. For example, it is using its advantages of the output tubes. Like for example, in the R300, it's using a 300B and it does have that sweetness that 300Bs are good at. So it's definitely taking advantage of the 300B design and also addressing the common downfalls of 300B designs, which is the bass, extension and slam, and quickness and tightness. It is definitely addressing that to some degree to make it better on the R300. So it is definitely a well-tuned design, well thought out design in terms of the overall sound signature. And you can definitely hear that when you plug it in and start playing it right off the bat. Now, of course, all of this is just with the stock tubes that it comes with. However, of course, I did some tube rolling. So the tube I chose to switch out was obviously the 300B tubes, and I decided to switch it out to the Puzzvane Western Electric tubes. And that's these tubes right here. And as you can see, they're quite nice looking tubes, and they're quite nice. I mean, Western Electric 300B tubes are legendary. The original Western Electric 300B tubes are regarded as one of the best, if not the best, 300B tubes to ever walk this earth or be made. And I've actually owned the original, and I was very skeptical in the beginning as to how, a tube that cost that much, because especially vintage 300B Western Electric tubes were really up there in price when they weren't making it anymore. So I bought them and I tried them, and to this day, I have heard not a better tube. And around the same period, many companies, not just Puzzvane, but many other companies, mainly Chinese companies, try to make their own version of the Western Electric tube. And when I got it in to try it out, it was never the same. Hands down, I prefer the original Western Electric tube that I had. However, I heard this tube from Puzzvane side by side with Western Electric, the original tubes, and I haven't heard the reissues. Now Western Electric has reissues of the 300B tube, and they say it's exactly the same thing. But if that's the case, I've heard this tube side by side with the original vintage tube, and I have to say, yes, there are slight differences, but this tube is really good at portraying the Western Electric sound for a fraction of the price. So this tube right here, I highly recommend it because it really brings the Willsenton amplifier to the next level. In fact, I've tried this tube with actually a lot of 300B designs, and they sound really good with this tube majority of the time. The thing that this tube brings to the table is more smoothness for those that are fatigue sensitive. So this is really liquid, velvety, smooth, but it's not rolling anything off. The soundstage becomes more larger and more enveloping and more inviting type of sound. So if you are someone that really appreciates that sweetness and you want to bring the sweetness to the next level on the Willsenton, I would say save up, don't buy like $200 tubes, because the tubes inside the Willsenton is half decent and still sounds great with the stock tube. But if you really wanted to really have an upgrade, then I would suggest saving up for this tube right here. I would say that this tube is actually my second favorite, just next to the Western Electric original vintage tubes. So that's pretty much it from me. I hope this video was enjoyable, and if it was, then please click that like button. It does help my channel out, and make sure to subscribe for future videos so that you don't miss it. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Until next time, peace.